Hello, welcome to the first year MCA course of Guru Nanak Institute of Technology, Kolkata. I'm Dr. Indrajit Bose and I shall be your course coordinator for this session. This paper is entitled Business Communication with a paper code of HU101. You know that in the course of this paper, we are taking a look at various forms, genres, and modes of communication in the business world, both spoken and written. This lecture is lecture 5 in the series, and we shall be taking a look at listening skills in this lecture. Now, listening obviously is one of the four important macro skill areas as far as language skills are concerned. So, in the course of this lecture on listening skills, I shall be focusing first on what is listening, and I shall try to differentiate between two often confused skills, hearing and listening. I shall also look at the various parameters and different forms that active listening takes. I shall briefly elaborate upon how to listen and look at various classifications of the taxonomy of different types of listening skills, both top down and bottoms up strategies. I should also look at the way in which listening problems of various kinds can be overcome. So, this shall be a comprehensive and detailed lecture about listening and all its sub skills and its problems and ways of overcoming. I hope you all are listening. Now, suppose I ask you, or I begin by asking you a question, or rather, a series of questions. What do you think you will respond? What was the last time that you heard the sound of rain tapping on the roof, or a child's merry laugh, or the drone of an aeroplane passing overhead, or the whispering of the leaves in the trees, the hum of a sewing machine as it constantly went on and on doing its work, the bell of a tram car clanging as the tram car moved across the tracks, or the sound of a gurgling river, again, a sound that goes on ceaselessly, on and on, ever and forever. I suppose you will say, or you will respond by saying that you do remember the last time you heard a child laughing, or the sound of a tramcar bell across the Maidan in Kolkata, or the sound of the swishing of the leaves in the last nor'wester or the storm that we had. But can you precisely pinpoint the date and time? You can. You cannot exactly say which was the exact last time that you heard the drumming of the rain on the roof. Why is that? Is it because you are so poor in terms of recalling past events? No, you can recall events that took place many years back. I myself today was recalling something that one of my teachers said to me, and that was 31 years ago, believe me or not. So we are all able to remember things which are there in our memories, or rather, if we use the technical terms correctly, which are there in our long term memories. We remember the things that people said to us, we remember our mental recollections or images of places, people, events, people's names, long after they have ceased to exist or to matter. On the other hand, we might confuse or forget other events or happenings which have just taken place a few hours ago, or they took place last week, or maybe last month. Why is that? Is it because we have a jumbled recollection? Is it because we are very forgetful or absent minded? No, the actual reason is that we are just not paying attention. How is it that I'm able to remember the exact words of my teacher, which was spoken to me 31 years ago? And that's a long, long time. It's because I have tried to remember them over these years. It's not that I haven't had lots of other things to remember as well in this intervening span of time, but I have given some importance to that, what my teacher said to me, and it has passed into my long-term memory and it has stayed over there. So it has not been dislodged by anything else which has also been there. So things which are there in the long-term memory do tend to remain there for extended periods of time or very long periods of time. Sometimes they are never forgotten, even till old age. But other things which are there in the short-term memory might be forgotten after some gaps of time or after an intervening time period. So we cannot say really that we always do listen with rapt attention to everything that we hear. The famous American writer Ernest Hemingway, as a matter of fact, said that most people never listen, by which he meant to say not that people don't listen at all, but that they don't listen attentively or with the right kind of focus or attention which listening calls for. Now, why is it that we are such poor listeners? There are various reasons for that. If you think a little, you will be able to discover various reasons yourself. Let me offer some of these reasons to you, and then you will realize how true all these things are. Most of the time, we tend to hear things wrong, or we cannot remember the things that we have heard, or we pay half hearted attention to things that we hear, or we tend to mix up details. We mix up dates, names of people, times, and so on. In fact, sometimes we cannot even summarize accurately the things that we have heard. Somebody asks you to give the recipe that was broadcast over the TV show last night, and you're not able to give the exact details, and you are shamefaced because of that. Why? Because you haven't paid that much of close attention. So you are a little confused, or you tend to jumble up the details. So we are, most of the time, rather poor and inattentive listeners. Now, of course, the next question comes as to why we are such poor listeners. So there are various reasons for that. Of course, it might be because there are some physical problems that we suffer from, or disabilities, or real disabilities, or physical challenges, like a hearing challenge, for example, or a speech disability or problem. So if I'm listening to somebody who is speaking and that person has a lisp or some other kind of physical problem, then it is likely that I may not be able to follow or remember what that person said. Or if I have a hearing difficulty, then I may not be able to hear the things which are said to me. Or there can be other kinds of external factors like lots of noises in the background. For example, when you are at the railway station, there are trains coming and going, there are passengers arriving and departing, there's the noise of porters carrying luggage, small children, various announcements over the audio system, and people are selling their goods. So there's a huge lot of noise and confusion over there. So this tends to act as a kind of a distraction. So if I'm hearing something over there, or if I'm trying to listen to something over there, I might get very easily distracted. In fact, listening or following the train announcements themselves becomes a bit of a problem sometimes because of this confusion in the background. Or sometimes, if the atmosphere is uncongenial, like it's very hot, or it's freezing cold, or there's a storm raging outside, I might again be distracted. I might not be able to listen properly. There can also be emotional preoccupations, like I am very sad or depressed. So again, I will not be paying attention. Or I may be extremely jubilant or happy. In that case also, I am not paying attention. There can also be technical problems like the breakdown in communication media, like a power failure or internet connectivity problem. Or there can be all kinds of physical interruptions like phones which are constantly ringing, or WhatsApp messages or other multimedia messages which keep pinging on your smartphone. So they tend to distract you. They tend to draw you away from what you are listening to. And there are time pressures. There is too little time in our hands. You are hard pressed for time. So you are frantic. You do not pay much attention. You get distracted because of the time pressures. So you don't listen. So these are all distractors which really take our attention away from what we should be doing, which is listening. There are other kinds of problems or issues related to listening. Sometimes there may be the problems associated with the speaker. Like, for example, the speaker that I'm listening to is speaking too fast or going too slow for me. Either way, I'm inconvenienced. So I'm losing out much of the content of what he or she is saying. Or there can be an unfamiliar accent. For example, one of my former students told me once that he is inconvenienced most in the meetings where many of the people higher up in his organization who are from Scotland speak with a Scottish accent. So he finds it extremely difficult to follow what they are saying. So an accent which is not familiar, or the use of unfamiliar words or expressions like cultural terms, for example, which are specific to a certain culture or a local culture, but not to other cultures, these might act as a stumbling block. For example, the word advertisement. We are familiar with the use of the word advertisement in India, but in America, people do tend to say ad or advertisement, whereas in England, they would say advert. So if I'm talking about adverts in India, many people might wonder what exactly they are, though of course it is fairly understandable to others. So there are lots of problems, especially due to local variations, or rather local cultural variations, and also the very nature of spoken language, which is basically unplanned. It's full of hesitations of various kinds, fillers, broken starts, repairs. All this tends to act as a kind of a distractor. It distracts us from focused listening, and we are not able to process the information well. Also, in fact, we have no chance to listen to anything again. Often, we don't have the chance to listen to the thing a second time. Sometimes, if you're listening to a recording, for example, you can play it a second or a third time. So it's possible that you will hear it again. So if you don't understand, you may get a chance to improve your understanding. But if it's a live program, or let's say you are part of an audience listening to someone or watching a program live, you may not get a chance to listen again. So in that case, you will just miss out part of what you haven't understood. And of course, as I said, that listeners do tend to lack cultural knowledge about local cultures often. So there are many things, like, for example, the context in British or American culture, which is missing as far as listeners in other countries or continents are concerned. Also, sometimes there is a lot of information which is packed together, and listeners are unable to process this information fast enough for them to be able to follow what is being said in terms of listening content. So these are various problems which create barriers or distractors in the listening process. And of course, we have to move a long way towards solving these problems if we are to become better listeners. And of course, if we don't become better listeners, we really cannot become better speakers. So, how is it that we can improve our listening? Is it possible to improve listening? Of course, it is. Listening is a skill, and anything which is a skill can be improved upon, or it is subject to improvement and modification. So, what do we have to do? Obviously, we have to focus on our particular problems as far as listening is concerned. Introspect, examine yourself, evaluate your listening, see what are the problems. Is it that you are missing out the difficult words or the words that are unfamiliar to you? Do you have a problem because of local culture or lack of cultural knowledge or lack of specific terms or vocabulary? Or is it because the accent is acting as a stumbling block for you? So there will be specific reasons why you are not such a good listener. So we can remove these instances of problems or issues by tackling them head on. Now, of course, we have to do this in a conscious and very active way, a proactive way, rather. Now, to begin with, there is a basic difference between hearing and listening. They are certainly not synonymous, and this is something that we have to know in the first place. When I'm hearing something, I am basically unfocused. Let me give you an example. Let's say it is a sunny winter morning and I'm sitting by the window in a room. There's a garden outside, and in the trees, a lot of birds are singing. It's very nice sitting in the sunshine, and I'm enjoying myself sitting by the window, hearing the birds in the tree. Now, after some time, a friend of mine walks into the room and asks me, "How are you feeling? Isn't it nice, all these birds singing?" I say, "Yes, of course. I'm enjoying the music and the bird song." So he asked me, "Did you hear the kingfisher a little while ago and the magpie a little while ago before that?" I said, "What kingfisher? I heard so many birds. I didn't really mark out the kingfisher." "Oh, I heard a lot of birds." So really, there are different birds out there. And if I do listen carefully, I can distinguish the cry of the kingfisher from the cry of the magpie from those of the other birds. But I haven't taken the trouble to do that. I have just immersed myself in the pleasant chorus or musical chorus of birds outside without bothering to distinguish between the different nature of the bird songs or the kind of calls of the birds. So what I have done is basically I have heard the bird calls, but I haven't really listened. Hearing is a process in which we are relatively unfocused, whereas in listening, we are focused and active. In hearing, we do not really tend to discriminate much, whereas in listening, we do focus very carefully on the content. In hearing, when we just hear something or it makes a kind of impression on our auditory faculties, we can maybe recapitulate a little about what we have heard, but not in details. We cannot give a lot of facts or details accurately. We might give, in fact, a confused idea of what we have heard. Whereas in listening, we are able to reproduce exact details sometimes. Often in hearing, we tend to hear things selectively or in snatches, whereas in listening, we retain a precise and detailed recollection of what we have listened to. We can focus, we are attentive, and we use a combination of different strategies in order to maximize our effectiveness as listeners. So, listening is a conscious and proactive process involving a continuous engagement using various strategies between the listener and the listening input, whereas hearing is relatively unfocused and does not make all these fine differentiations. So, we have to become better listeners, and we can do so by maximizing our use of different strategies. What strategies might these be? Let us now find out. So, to begin with, active listening involves 100% engagement of the listener with the input, with the focus being on specific details and having the ability to identify individual elements like words, phrases, or discourse markers. Like discourse markers, for example, would be indicators, or we might say features or indicators of which particular type of genre it is. Like for example, if I hear the word abracadabra, alakazoo, I know that it is a magician or a conjurer's speech. And if I hear the word aviation fuel, pilot, and autopilot, I will know that somebody from the aviation industry is speaking. So these are the discourse markers that tend to differentiate our speech or discourse from one another. Also, the ability to infer meaning from sounds, intonation, and stress, like, what's that? Why are you doing that? Would indicate that the person who is saying these things or asking these questions is very, very tense compared to the person who's saying, what's that? Why are you saying that? So this person, the second person, is rather cool and composed, is quite unruffled, whereas the person who's saying, what's that? What's happening outside? Is very, very tense or nervous, you might say. Also, listening involves the ability to make connections with the local or surrounding context and with the global context. So this program I'm listening to, oh yes, it is something which is by somebody from the southern part of India. So I can make out certain aspects of uh, South Indian culture over there. So certain terms which are popular in South India are being used over there, and also the pronunciation or accent of the speakers is that of Tamil speakers of English or Kannada speakers of English. So I have made some connections. Whereas this other person who is speaking, oh, I can make out that this person is from the Caribbean. So obviously, this recording that I'm listening to is from a sports commentary made in the West Indies. So I can make out again from the terms, the accent, and various other a horde of features which I am able to demarcate because I have listened carefully and attentively. So this is what active listening is all about. Now, what about the listening sub-skills which have to be focused on? To begin with, there are a lot of sub-skills. Some of these are related to our process of listening before we have heard the input of what we are listening to. Some appertain to the while listening phase when we are in the process of listening. And others, yet others are there which become operative only after we have listened to the input and we are introspecting, rationalizing, or we are thinking about what we have heard. So accordingly, they tend to be different or a bit different from each other. We shall begin by looking at examples of all of these. Now, one of the strategies that we have in the pre-listening phase is called predicting. To predict would mean that we think about or we try to guess or suggest what the listening input might be before we have actually heard it. Again, when we listen or in the while listening phase, there are strategies that we use like listening for the gist or listening only for the summary of what we are hearing, not the details of the content. There's also selective listening, listening for details, which is what we are doing most of the time, note taking, or the taking of notes while we are listening to something, listening and making inferences. This again takes place after we have listened or the listening process is over. Clarifying and verifying, which again take place in the post-listening phase. So there are, really speaking, a slew of different sub-skills of listening. And we have a horde of interesting examples and activities which we can associate with them. Let us do so and find out a bit more about them. Predicting. Obviously, predicting is something which is done by us or by listeners before they have actually listened. So, before I listen to this track from the Carpenters, I look at the CD album. I look at the title of their songs. I try to look at the different kinds of genres that they sing at by looking up their songs on the wiki site. Or I look at the words in the lyrics of some of these songs. I look at what people have said about them, or newspaper reviews, or you know, short newspaper captions, or of headline captions about them, brief descriptions by music critics, or taglines or catchphrases about them, like the soulful nightingales of the Caribbean, or the nightingale singing with full-throated ease in the Canary Islands. So such phrases like that. Or we try to associate with the context. So this is a fisherman's song. There are a lot of songs about fisher folk and fishing in this album. Oh, so and there's a picture on the album cover of fishermen with fishing boats out in the sea and lots of palm trees, palm fringed islands on the shorelines. Also, it might be somewhere in the Caribbean. So, really, our local knowledge or knowledge of the world as such is coming into play when we are taking a look at these features. We are rehashing our previous knowledge, so to speak. We are trying to make a guesswork. Now, predicting is all about making well informed guesses, or you might say lucky guesses sometimes, which might hit the mark or it may miss the mark. We don't know. But then what's the use? Well, what we usually do is that we try to predict from what I've just said: titles, captions, reviews, what people have said, pictures, images, associations with other countries and other cultures, descriptions, taglines, and so on. We try to associate, and guess. But of course, after that, we listen. And what we listen to might really change our expectations, which we have so far been building up with the help of all those hints and suggestions. What is the use of it, really? Well, we might not always succeed in hitting the mark or hitting the bull's eye as far as making predictions is concerned before listening. But what is important is that this whole process of drawing associations that we are involved in does tend to heighten our interest and expectations about the listening input before we have actually tried listening to it. So what happens is that we are in a heightened state of expectancy. Our interest is built up, our attention is aroused, our focus is caught by the listening input before we start listening. So by the time we are ready to listen, we are much more in a heightened state of awareness. So predicting basically raises our expectations and awareness about listening input, and it's a kind of awareness raising strategy which makes us better equipped listeners before we start listening. So it is quite valuable as a strategy. What about the various while listening strategies. Okay, so now listening for the gist. When do we listen for the gist or for the substance or the summary of what we are hearing? Surely, most of the time, we are interested in the details. No, not always. Sometimes when we have or when we are saddled with or burdened with long, boring lectures to listen to, or long audio texts or tracks to go through, large, voluminous tracts, which may not be fully relevant or meaningful for us, what we do is we are content with only a kind of brief or sketchy idea about the whole content. So what we do is, okay, we listen with a bit of a mind tending to blur out sharp edges and distinctions. Okay, this is what it's about. Okay, this is what it's about. Okay, this is what it's about. Okay, so this whole thing is about nuclear power in the UK and all the new nuclear power substations which are being built over there. That's all. Okay, I don't want to know where it's being built. I don't want to know which are the places where the atomic power stations are being built. That's all that blah, blah, blah. So many different places are being mentioned. So I'm not really interested in that. So I want only a very rough idea or a gist, and that can be summarized in one line. This lecture is talking about the development of atomic power and the new atomic power plants or substations in the UK. Now, obviously, there are a lot of details over there, but I am not able to give because I have just listened for the gist. Selective listening is a kind of variant of listening for the gist where we focus only on parts or episodes, or we just focus on certain parts but not on the others. Now, often we do this if we are already familiar with the content. Like, for example, an audio book. Oh, that's great expectations. Is it you want me to listen to? Well, I've already heard it twice. This is the third time. So you are not very interested in listening to it episode by episode, chapter by chapter. So what you do is you listen to the first two chapters, listen to the sixth chapter and the eighth chapter, and you are done. Or extracts which are over lengthy, we tend to skip and jump. Or maybe listening extracts are very dull or monotonous. So we tend to skip and listen selectively. What we do is our mind, we may not physically always skip the parts or we skip the recording, but we tend to switch off, okay? Our attention tends to go off at certain points so that what we retain is only a haphazard idea of the contents of what we have heard, or we retain a vague or imprecise or sketchy or brief idea about the thing, or an episodic idea about the contents. That's because we are paying only periodic attention to what is being played or what we are hearing. So that is selective listening. So we listen selectively, meaning we listen to certain things, but others we filter out and we don't listen to them. There are other while listening strategies which are very important and crucial. They are listening for details, which is what we are doing when we are at the railway station or when we are at the airport, because we are interested in finding out about the trains, their arrival and departure timings, with the train number, the name of the next station, or the departing or arrival time, or the plane company, which is the one that we are taking, the service provider, or you can say the flight number, other details like departing time, the destination, and so on. So we are interested in all these details. At other times also we want a detailed idea of the content, like for example the recipe of how to make pastry. So we want a detailed idea of all the steps of how to make pastry. So if we miss out even one step, the whole thing will go wrong, and that will be a culinary disaster. So we are interested in all the details over there. So nothing is to be missed out. Not a single step, not a single word. So the lexis or the grammar becomes very important over there. The pronunciation of words and individual letters and sounds, that also becomes important. So we do a lot of differentiation of similar things from others and a lot of scanning mentally at least. Like, oh, this process of making the soup, oh, this is similar to what I heard that the Goanese people make, right? Isn't it? But it's different from what the Maharashtrians do. So they have a different way of making the soup. So I am differentiating between the different ways of making the soup. Again, note taking. This is one of the simplest ways of remembering all the details because, as I have said, we tend to forget, we tend to miss out details, and sometimes the speed at which we are getting the information is too fast for us to be able to remember all that at one go. So one of the easiest ways of trying to remember details is a quick jotting down, which is what we do when we are taking notes. So when you go in for the lecture on nuclear power, what you're doing is noting down what the professor is saying about nuclear power over there. So you tend to remember the details of what the professor said long after that lecture is over. And you can give other people a lot of ideas about what the professor said over there. Often we tend to use short forms, abbreviations, and mnemonics of various kinds in order to make notes because it saves time and it helps us remember. Also, we use rubrics of various kinds and also different types of graphic organizers like Venn diagrams, spider diagrams, word webs, and so on. Charts and tables of various kinds. The more we use them, the easier it is to make a good note, and it's possible for us to keep a good mental picture and to remember what we have noted down. So note taking is a very, very valuable strategy in listening. And in order to become better listeners, I think we cannot do worse than to begin with being good note takers. What about the post-listening phase? Well, in post-listening, there are also various strategies which we use. But these strategies are slightly different. Like, for example, listening and drawing inferences. We might also call it inferential listening. What is that? Well, basically, it's a process of rationalization after listening or deducing from the content. Oh, this person was talking about what she does in the morning, what she does in the afternoon, what she does in the evening, what she does before going to bed. So the conclusion that I draw from that is that this is a very hardworking person who remains busy in activities throughout the day. Well, has this person mentioned that she's hardworking? That she told us in so many words that I'm a hardworking person or I work very hard throughout the day? No, she hasn't. But from the lists of daily activities that she is talking about, we can draw the assumption or we can draw the inference that she is an extremely busy person and remains engaged with various activities throughout the course of the day, from dawn up to the time that she goes to bed. Sometimes we can also guess various kinds of subtexts or hidden meanings which are really concealed and they are not expressed in the literal meanings of words. Clarifying and verifying are also very important post-listening strategies. Sometimes it may be that we are unsure about what we have heard. What was that phrase again? What did he say? Oh, I didn't catch it. So if you just let it go, what will happen is that you will be mentally confused or there will be gaps in your understanding or listening. What you can do is to ask, was it this that you said or was it that? Did you mention the last hour or did you mention the first hour? So a query with a repetition for cross-checking, that is what is meant by verifying. I'm cross-checking. What did you say? Did you say 23rd or 24th? Or did you say 23rd evening? So I'm verifying the information. Clarifying, I really didn't get what you mean by this term torque. So could you please shed some light on that? So this is a clarification question or a request for clarification because the person in the audience doesn't understand the meaning of this specific term, technical term that I've used over there. So a query with a request for explanation or elaboration. Could you give us a little more explanation of this term ballast that you have used? I would be very grateful for that. So again, there may be requests for clarifying or there may be verification questions. Basically, the purpose that they serve is to make it much more lucid and clearer to us that these are the things which have been said in listening, and this is what the content was all about. So these are very valuable post-listening strategies. Now basically the listening processes are of two types, top-down or bottoms-up. Top-down is when real-world knowledge is used in listening comprehension. It makes use of context, schemas, and scripts. And bottoms up when we focus on the literal meaning of messages, focusing on the sounds, the words, the sentences, and the meaning. So it's like a, a, an unscrambling of a jigsaw puzzle. So if I've got the pieces all jumbled up and I put them together, what I get is a picture of a farmyard with animals, or I get a picture of Cinderella washing and cleaning with her wicked sisters and stepmother watching in the background. So if I put them together, I assemble them, I get the complete picture. That is bottoms up. Top down is the other way around. This is a Chinese advertisement. How do I know that? I don't know Chinese, but it has got all the features of advertisements which are common. So by listening to it, I can make out that it's an advertisement. So that is top-down processing. So when we listen bottoms up, we try to focus on the sounds, the words, the sentences, and their meaning. And in fact, we make out larger topics and propositions from the word chunks. And we focus on the individual units to infer the meaning. For example, the topic for today's lecture is nuclear power. Suppose I have these markers, audio markers for the lecture: fuel reserves, alternative energy sources, biogas, reduced pollution levels. What is the lecture about? Obviously, it is about alternative energy sources. There is a tonal difference. For example, if I say, yes, I'm inquiring. Yes, a little irritated. Yes, I agree. Yes, I'm a little shy and hesitant. And yes, when I'm emphatic. So they are all different. In top-down, however, we make a use of the real-world knowledge to infer meaning. And top-down processing is concept or meaning-driven. It makes use of contextual knowledge schemas and scripts, as I have said, and prior knowledge and interrelated ideas are made much of. What about the different types of listening with which we are familiar or which we use or employ when we are listening? There is discriminative listening, when we identify subtle differences in sound and tonal variations. There is also listening comprehension, when we listen to identify and infer meaning. This is what we are doing at the railway station. This is what we are doing at the airport. This is what we are doing when we attend class lectures. So basically, this is called content listening, full listening, or informative listening. This is what we are doing most of the time, as a matter of fact, in order to identify and to get the meaning from the content. There is also critical or evaluative listening, which is something that we can do post-listening, when we listen in order to make some value judgments or in order to evaluate. Now this needs a real-time effort as well as cognitive effort. You need to understand what you are trying to judge. You need some experience of the world in order to make this judgment. There is also empathetic listening, when, as listeners, we empathize and identify with the content that we are listening to, which involves aptitude, tastes, and sensibility as well. So, for example, I'm listening to a song about a sunny day, and it is a bright and sunny day, and I'm traveling in a car, and the breeze is blowing, the flowers are blooming by the roadside, the sun is shining, and I'm listening to this song which says, "You are my sunshine." So I'm humming the bars of the song. I empathize with the song and with the words of the song, and I'm fully in agreement with that. So this is empathetic listening. Basically, we can say that listening is about trying to overcome the various problems or barriers which inattentive or half-hearted listening deals with all the time. So basically, what we can do in order to improve ourselves as listeners is to listen attentively, or to listen with focus, and to understand or pay more close attention to what we are listening to. Also, to pay attention to the content and the context. What is the context? What is the surrounding context? What is the local context? What's the global context? So make these connections. Also add cultural notes. Okay, so if this is about a song of the Caribbean, I don't know much about the Caribbean culture, so I find out what it means. This is calypso. Oh, what is calypso? So I add a cultural note. Use listening strategies like inferential listening, selective listening, or content listening actively, consciously, and use them all the time. Also, practice listening and take down notes as far as possible, as far as practicable, and reflect on what you have listened to. Build up your strengths as a listener, and then you will really go a long way towards becoming a better and more active listener. And if you become a better listener, you will obviously one day become a better speaker. So I hope that my lecture on listening skills and sub skills has been useful to you, and that you have learned various things in the course of the lecture which will enable you to use more listening strategies proactively the next time you listen. So I hope you've been listening. So have you been listening with attention? So I look forward to more such occasions where I will have the scope of interacting with you in the future. For the time being, I'm signing out, and I hope to see you again next time. Thank you.